Hi, I'm Rachel Lancaster, and this is the Magnificent Midlife podcast. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started. And the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now's our time. My guest today is Alisoun Mackenzie, and Alisoun is many things. She's a coach, an author, a retreat leader, a yoga teacher, a speaker, amongst other things. She was a stockbroker for quite a while until she decided she wanted a different life. And she combined her passion for making a difference in the world with her financial savvy in the book Give to Profit, How to Grow Your Business by Supporting Charities and Social Causes. Now, I've asked Alisoun on today because I really want to talk to her about how we can all make more of a difference in the world and why that's so important. So welcome, Alisoun.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me, and to all your listeners for tuning in.
It's lovely to have you here, and I want to kick off by, obviously you had quite a radical change in your life. You had several radical changes, but I'd love to know, how did you become so passionate about this need for us to be doing good in the world?
You know, it is a good question, because sometimes I wonder if it was something that was always within me or something that evolved. But the first time I really remember being conscious about my real desire was in my early 20s, and I'd gone off travelling for a year, and I came back and I set up a travel club. And the intention there was to encourage others to go off and make the most of life, but start to do good in the world as well. But I just I really wasn't clear enough about what that was. So we set up the club, but it didn't turn into a business, and I fell back into the financial world again to live. But the longer I was in the corporate financial services world, the more intense that the stress and the disconnect to the values of that industry became. Even when I was working there, I used to call it the greed machine. And the higher up I went, I suppose, within the business and my career, increasingly I was getting anxiety. I never want to have to admit to people I'm the director of an investment company. Never. And and then I was sort of going, well, if that's what I'm feeling, is that not a little bit of feedback that really I'm in the wrong place? So I went off traveling, would come back and be called in to do another piece of work, for that company. Even when I was away traveling, I got called into a financial company over in Australia. I was getting stronger and stronger, I think, as the years went on, to just focus in on being more me. And I admire anyone who has that clarity from an early age. So many other women that I meet, it seems to come later in life, or we're on a journey and then we find our calling, we find our connection, or we go through some kind of pain or trauma or anxiety, which leads us to explore something different for ourselves. So for me, that really started to happen in 2003 when I was offered the chance of voluntary redundancy. I thought, this is it, gotta go now. And that's when I took the leap, really.
It's so interesting because I could have almost said those exact words myself. As I said before we hit record, I worked in the financial city. I was doing share offerings. It was full on. I wasn't the finance person, but I was the financial PR person. And I struggled. And that sense of dis-ease, I think that for years, and I couldn't really put my finger on what it was. Why did I feel so uncomfortable? It was probably at least 15 years. Probably a bit more than that, because then I, transferred and went off and did something else kind of related, and finally left corporate when I was about 40. But I could say the same thing, and that niggling feeling, it just grows and it grows and it grows, doesn't it? And then it's like, I can't do this anymore. And it's that values, what you talked about, values, it doesn't fit with our values anymore, does it? It's so powerful.
And I just kept saying to myself, well, you make rich people richer and they moan if they pay tax, or you don't make the money and they moan because you're losing money. And I was like, well, I'm really not feeling I'm making a difference in the world, There's got to be a bigger calling. got to be a bigger calling.
So what are the particular ways in which you make a difference now? Because I know there's some things you're doing overseas that are particularly interesting and that really sort of started you off on this road. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember one particular day I'd just come back from it was a contract I had. I was self-employed by this time, but it was a contract delivering training for a financial services company because, you know, I had the contacts in that industry. And I'd come back from India and I just thought, no, again, values clash even now as an external consultant is now too much. And I can remember saying to the person who I had the contract with, look, you really don't need me. I've trained up everybody in the UK and India. I've trained up internal trainers. I think it's time for me to go. And I phoned my sister up and I said, you know, I know we were meeting after work, but should we just meet for lunch? It's a lovely sunny day. We can sit outside. I said, because I've just decided I can't compromise my values in any form of work anymore. And she said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I've got some, you know, I still had other client work I was quite happy with. But I knew I needed a shift. And all I knew was that I needed to do something that really connected with my heart and enabled me to feel I was making a difference in the world. You know, like many others, I used to watch, you know, film footage of earthquakes, natural disasters, wars, and my heart would go out, you know, and I'd get upset about what I'd be watching, and I'd want to go and physically help, but I wasn't a doctor, I wasn't a medic, I wasn't a fire person, you know, that was needed in those critical times. So I didn't really have that skill set. So yes, of course I gave money, but it felt too transactional. I wanted to do more. So that day I said to my sister, well, I know it's got to do with my skill set in some way. I know it's probably got to do with something to do with travel, and I'd love it to be with children because I haven't been fortunate to have my own children. And that's something that, you know, I really wanted to be a mum. And the very next day, an email came in my inbox about a project in Rwanda. And I just reached out, you know, to that woman and just said, love what you're doing in Rwanda, would love to hear more. And that was the start of what has become really part of my life. You know, at that point, I think of what I would now call myself a recovering white saviour, you know, because there's elements of that are a little bit white saviour-esque, which is a whole other topic. But thankfully, I was with a project that actually managed things extremely well. But, you know, I was involved in a project where we'd been invited into Rwanda to do trauma healing with young genocide survivors. We were going back twice a year. It was a long-term project around really helping the Rwandan communities upskill and so they could cope themselves. So it was an amazing project. And it helped me reconnect to what was important, you know. But then that project came to an end and it was a case of, well, what will I do next? And I connected with somebody through a community I'm part of who builds schools in Asia, and found myself on a call 2.5 years ago saying to him, I think I'd like to raise the money to help build a school. And he said, would you come to Cambodia? They've had the genocide. You know, there was that similarity. So yes, I led a team and we all raised the money to build the school. And earlier this year, I took them over to Cambodia on a trip where I took them around Cambodia. We did visit the school, and I would say that, you know, from a white saviour perspective, everything is done in a way of very much around empowering the local community, and we only visit schools in a way that they feel is appropriate, and every culture is very different. And sometimes if that involves no children, because I'm not an advocate in disrupting education, then that's what we do. You know, it's very much whatever the community want us to do. And we certainly don't volunteer and do anything while we're over there. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. So that's me. It's taken me off on a different journey again with the business, and I seem to be leading another team of women. And this time we're building a school in Lombok, which is an island right beside Bali. 400 schools were destroyed by the earthquake there 2.5 years ago. It's another critical aid situation because more than half of those schools still haven't been built. You know, and there's a massive problem with plastic. Indonesia is only second to China in plastic pollution in the world. So we're partnering with a charity which is, again, working with the government to build a factory over there and rebuild the schools using recycled plastic bricks to clear the oceans, clear the island of rubbish and create jobs. So, yeah, amazing.
And when you say we, does that mean your enterprise, or does it mean you working with some other organisation? What does that mean?
So the way I do it is I partner with a charity that is based out there. They live out there. They have all the relationships with the locals. You know, currently they're feeding thousands of people every month because the tourist industry has obviously collapsed over there too. So they've gone into another critical situation. So I partner with this charity, and what I do is I bring together groups of women who want to raise funds and go on a trip that is an impact trip. So part of that is to then go and visit the school, but actually part of it is about responsible tourism, education around white saviours and white privilege, and becoming better global citizens. So that bit is through my business, but I partner with a charity.
And you've mentioned white saviorism, and that was on my list of questions to ask you about. I had not thought about that before this year. It hadn't occurred to me. And, you know, as I've said on this podcast, on other episodes, I've had a complete mind shift this year. So, A, what is white saviorism? And how can we continue to give help around the world where help is needed without being white saviours?
Okay, really, gosh, a couple of really, really good questions. You know, I think what is really good that's happened this year is that there is an increased awareness of this topic, which is wonderful. So in terms of what it is, I think the easiest way to get people to relate into it is if you ever have a feeling that you want to go and volunteer overseas, question the feeling. What is it that's driving that? Is it because you want to go and help people? And question, why does it need to be overseas? When it starts to go into being overseas, it's quite often, there's so many different subtleties and cultural beliefs and systems that we've bought into, you know, around countries needing rescued, people in poorer countries needing rescued. And that was all wrapped up in colonialism. You know, they didn't need it rescued. They didn't need to be have their own cultures beaten out of them, you know, and enforced to live by the way that Westerners thought was a better way. You know, you look back and it's just so appalling, but without getting caught up in what we did, the reality is that when we are of white privilege, so we are passed for as being white, then for us to go over into a country, particularly where it's had a history of being under some kind of colonial rule, we're stepping into our own mindsets and our own beliefs around, I want to come and help. But that is in some ways disrespectful to the people over there because maybe they don't need our help. But how many people actually question, do they need my help? What skills do they need? What resources do we need? And that even extends to things like, you know, when people go on trips, they take things over with them. Underneath that action is some kind of unconscious belief that we have the solutions and they don't. And it's not helping their local economy. It's not helping the whole humanitarian aid model. So it's really about thinking about the role we play, and it's always a big one. I can remember when I pulled my first team together for that school in Cambodia, nearly everybody who joined the team was saying things like, oh, so can I do a little workshop on such and such? And could we do this in the school? Could we do that? And there were so many things wrong, and I felt like the no girl constantly because I was going, no. Schools are education systems, they have their own syllabuses. No, they're not a practice ground for therapists or anybody else to go out and try their stuff in a different country that's not regulated in the same way we are here. You know, and it was all these conversations. And do you actually know they need it? Maybe they have their own people. Maybe there's another way of supplying the money or supporting the growth of their own skill sets. So in Rwanda, we were training them to be trainers. We'd been invited by people in Rwanda to train them to be able to do the trauma healing. Trauma healing was a need. When we look at Lombok, there is a need. You know, it's been 2.5 years. Nobody's gone to rescue or help or support, not even the locals. They've not got the capacity right now. So it's really being careful around how we act and what drives us to do it. That's maybe your first question. Your second question, and I can give you a link. I've actually done a blog on this called Let's Stop Being White Saviours, so I'll give you the link that you can share. But the first thing I would say is to question why you're doing it, or why you feel the need to go and do something overseas. Could you get that same need met locally? And if not, if you still want to go and experience a different culture, which I do believe is really good for all of us, you know, and for humanity, for world peace, expands our perceptions, then be thinking of doing it in ways that are respectful and have a positive impact. So it's also tied into that responsible travel piece. So, there's ways we can do things. Like when we were in Cambodia, whenever we went out for a meal or a drink, the first thing we did was we looked up to see if there was a local social enterprise or charity that operated as a cafe or restaurant. That was how we travelled. Every time we booked a tour, we did it again through a social enterprise or a charity. So, yeah, there's different ways you can have a positive impact without being the white saviours.
It's fantastic, because it is so easy to slip into that. There's a whole industry, there was before COVID, where people would go for 2 weeks and volunteer somewhere on a holiday. And actually now thinking about that, it's kind of like, it's not great, is it?
No, it's not, because that's about getting our need met. And so I see the time to do it is after a critical aid situation where there is the need for help, where people have the skills. Anything other than that, it's about helping a country through development agencies empower themselves. Whereas even in a country like Cambodia, they've got loads of orphanages that are fake orphanages because they've sprung up for the tourists. That's appalling. And literally they're rolling out children to, pull in the tourists.
Really?
Yes, and you have this happening in different countries because we've created our need to feel better about ourselves and feed into being that white saviour. Because let's face it, when you hear about people, quite often you sort of go, wow, look at what they're doing. Again, that's the white saviour mindset. It's as if we're seeing what they're doing as being more honourable, more compassionate, something even better than volunteering at the local food bank. But actually, maybe the local food bank needs us, and that's a much better place for us to be, and we donate our money, or we go on holiday to these places, use our money to do that and feed the local economies.
I think it's such an important conversation for white people to be having. I really do. It's just, I just want to talk about this more and more, and I'm therefore delighted to be able to talk about this with you. You've got direct experience of this, and of actually having been there and having sort of seen the light and realised that maybe you don't want to do it in that way. It's like with so many of these issues, I think, around race as a white person, until you see it, it doesn't register, it doesn't make an impact to you. But then suddenly the light goes off. Well, it has for me this last year. The light has gone off in so many ways. And I do say on this podcast, my son is mixed race, and he questions everything now about himself, about race, but about me, because he's the child of colour and I'm the white woman. So there's a really interesting dynamic there. And it's actually, I feel like it's a gift, but by heck, it's a difficult, challenging gift. Because he calls me on everything.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, I was brought up in this world, and that's how I am, but that's no longer an excuse.
That's right. Yeah, no, it's not.
We cannot say, well, that's the way I was brought up. Can't do that anymore. No. Because we have to take responsibility.
Yeah, it's on our radar, as it should be now, and I can't even imagine what that's like. I've got another 2 or 3 friends who are in a similar position, and they talk about, the pushback, and it's that emotional charge because this child is your flesh and blood, and they're quite rightly questioning things. But my gosh, what a great teacher to also have that insight and that wisdom. And what for anybody wanting to know more about this topic, what I would also do is refer them to, there's a phenomenal organisation, it's a charity called No White Saviours. Go and check them out. Their podcast, their resources are phenomenal, and I'm by no means an expert. I'm just sharing, I guess, my experiences and what I'm now doing, because the reality is, as white people, when we get involved in any kind of project, we will get slack now. And it's quite right that people question us and challenge us, and we have to be prepared to look at ourselves, to know when we think we're doing things correctly, but also to always take the questions, the challenges, and go inward and really question, right, is there anything more I can be doing here to be a better person and be more respectful?
And I think probably this leads me on very well to one of my questions I was going to ask, was why do you hate the term giving back?
Oh gosh, I wonder where you were going there. To me, when I speak to people, and particularly Actually, it's for all of us as individuals. I meet so many people who say, I'll give back or I'll volunteer when I have the time or money to do it. So to me, there are so many critical needs in this world, whether it's the environment, giving to the planet rather than taking. So, giving back, it also assumes that we've got something that doesn't belong to us, that we need to give back. Sometimes there can be this edge of superiority as well, that we are better and therefore we need to give back. And that energy between two parties when it's that way isn't healthy at all. But also the giving back piece, it does assume we have to have something first. Whereas I think that actually we're better just to give and not be waiting. I think there's too many critical situations now where we can justify things for ourselves and not think enough about other people, where we do have to be questioning, is it right for us to pillage the planet and then plant a tree, or is it better to look at, well, how do we have less impact on the planet in the first place? It doesn't mean we stop building the trees, but it's saying, well, let's bring the action into the now rather than pushing it back later. So that's really, it's about the deferment, and it's about the feeling we need to wait. We don't. We can all do things now, and if the sooner we, when it comes to living a meaningful life, the sooner we can connect into a deeper sense of purpose and our contribution and our dharma and what we're here to do and the way that we're here to serve, the more fulfilled we will be in life.
Yeah, absolutely. You've already mentioned that you've had to come to terms with being involuntarily childless, and I can only imagine how difficult that must have been. But has doing what you do helped with that?
Yes, and it's quite a common question that people ask. And actually, when I look around, I can remember the first time I was asked this question was actually over in Rwanda. We had a film made about the work we were doing there, and the film maker at one point was sitting me down and just observed the women that are part of this project. Most of us didn't have children. In fact, I don't know that any of us had children. Is that something that is feeding people to come over? And again, I suppose that for me was the bigger emotional driver, probably from around 2010, 10 years ago, was that when I realised that the likelihood of me ever having children, it had gone, really. There was a very, very slim chance, but it was coming to terms with that piece. So I suppose in the way it was the end of that grieving process. Yes, it felt better to be on a journey of exploring and leaning into the charitable piece to explore different ways I could have meaning. Now, I know that children, from listening to parents, they'll say, but children don't necessarily give you that sense of meaning, and I can't completely understand it, but I hear what parents say around that. But I think when you don't have children, our bodies as a woman are made to have children. Our hips, the way we distribute fat in our bodies around the hips, and then you go through the menopause and it comes up to the midriff, we're made to have children. There's a hormonal, chemical dance and balance that's going on constantly in your body. And when you've not used that to create children, then there is something else inside that seems to drive us. And I've noticed actually now being through menopause, it's gone, which is lovely. But yes, leaning into the charitable activities helped me on a journey, without a doubt, to get part of that need met. But what it didn't do was it didn't take away the need to do the work on myself, to acknowledge that I was grieving, to do the healing on myself, to let go of the emotions of grief, and to really dig deep into, well, what is it that's going to give my life meaning, and what's that journey going to be for me? Because I think of women who haven't had children, we just have an extra layer of trauma or grief. So it's just different, different. But then there are women that have children and lose children, and there's lots of different things that go on in life, and we all have a different version, I suppose, of our relationship to motherhood and being a mother, and sometimes the different trauma and the different aspects around that.
But I'm guessing that while going through menopause may have diminished that sense of needing that side of womanhood, supposedly womanhood, it hasn't diminished your passion for making a difference in any shape or form, has it?
No, it definitely hasn't, you know, and I think that's because, and you know, I'd love to hear what you think of this, but once you feel that you're on your path, you never want to step off it again. You know, once you're aligned to the truth of who you are, why would you not continue that? And I can't imagine, even when I retire, I will always be doing something to help others in some way, because to me, you know, not only is it good for other people, but it brings us fulfillment and that connection and that sense of belonging and contribution to humanity, you know. So no, it hasn't diminished it. But what I think what the menopause, going through the menopause did was it stopped the desire for children to be so extreme because the hormonal balance had changed. Yeah. But for a lot of people, that can actually almost make it worse, because that's for a lot of people, that's when their real grieving starts. And I suppose because I was trained as a therapist and did lots of work previously in the previous 10 years, that never happened for me at menopause because I'd been through that grieving process earlier. Although I do understand, apparently, it can hit again when all your friends are having grandchildren. So we'll see what happens at that point. At the moment, I'm fine.
Yeah, I think, be prepared for that, I would imagine.
Yeah.
It probably is, isn't it?
Yeah, but again, you know, it's just, well, we'll deal with it when that happens, you know.
Yeah. And you have the tools. You've gone out and got the tools to enable you to do that, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's, if anybody's listening to this that is in a similar position of being involuntary childless or trying to conceive, just know there are the tools out there. You know, there are people that can support around that, and you can overcome the emotional grieving and distress that's caused by it.
So I know that you're also, as well as all of the voluntary work that you're doing and everything else that making a difference, you are a lifelong learner. And you keep reinventing yourself. So I thought, rather than you giving us a whole, the last 20 years of how many times you've reinvented yourself, what have you learned in the last 2 years? Because it's quite a lot, I know.
Well, I suppose the big one for me was that reconnection with travel and realising I love doing something around travel and leading people on trips. So that's been phenomenal for me. But I think one of the things you're probably referring to is the relationship that I've now got to yoga. And well, I am quite surprised that this has happened, that I've become a yoga teacher in my 50s. I am very surprised, you know, because you maybe can't see it or hear it, you know, but I'm short. I don't have a particularly flexible body. You know, I wasn't the one that was, you know, doing all the super duper poses in a class. I've always looked after my health and fitness, but no, I would never have thought I was exceptional at yoga or anything. But at the beginning of well, last year. So I'm conscious that this might be going out this will be going out in 2021. So it'll be 2 years ago, roughly, from when you're watching or listening to this. I hosted a Business for Good conference, which was massive. I'd already had adrenal fatigue. I'd had burnout, and I actually was, the last 3 months before the conference, I was operating from bed. I was running a project team, pulling this all together from bed, mostly in bed, for 3 months before it happened. Several times I thought about cancelling, but I didn't want to let people down. It was much better to make myself ill. And so sometimes when you're in this, when that drive to keep going is going, you've got to look back and question yourself. But, you know, I delivered the conference. It was a fab conference, but by day 2, I had to put somebody else on stage at my own conference because I couldn't hold the stage any longer. And my body was just giving up. By the next day, my back went. Fortunately, I knew I needed to get some kind of retreat in place, so I got on a plane and I headed off to Bali. Went on a beautiful retreat, very intensive retreat of pampering and being looked after with good food and all that, and the spiritual piece as well. And it reconnected me to my love of yoga, but a daily practice. So I'd been dabbling. I mean, I've done yoga on and off since my early 20s, you know, but it had never become the daily self-care practice or spiritual practice that it now is. Just life was too busy, or I prioritised other people's needs over my own self-care, I guess. But what lockdown did was it gave me the opportunity to go, okay, nobody's got expectations of anything else at the moment. I just launched the retreat side of my business, which obviously had to go on hold. So I was like, well, what could I do? And I was like, well, why don't I explore the yoga teacher piece? And I was surprised that you can learn to do this online. I don't know why. I've been teaching people how to do things online for the last 10 years. So why? Again, I don't know. But it was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I guess I went into it to deepen my own practice and to really, really develop the habit of self-care and putting me first. So things like going onto my mat, meditating, doing the exercises. I've got some physio exercises I do as well as my yoga, and doing all these things before I start to engage with other people. I never actually thought I was going to necessarily end up teaching it. I went into it for me. But as I was doing that, people started asking me, well, could you, show me what to do? And I'm very much, it's very slow, mindful yoga. It's not the athletic stuff. It's not about the handstands and the postures. There's actually another couple of styles of yoga that are very good for the parasympathetic side of the brain, and really helping us around, anxiety, stress. It's slow. It's the science of slow, really, and the neuroscience of slow, and pain relief and, fatigue and things. So there's a whole other style that I'm teaching for older women who don't want the athletic stuff, but want to, look after themselves and age well. So there we go. That's been a huge surprise, but yeah, I'm off on that journey and started teaching, so...
I think it's amazing. I think it's really fantastic. I mean, I'm a huge fan of yoga. I've heard other teachers say, that they went into the teaching to deepen their own practice rather than necessarily to teach, but then it sort of became teaching. But I think it's amazing. Brilliant. Good for you.
I'm just a believer in leaning into what feels good. Leaning into what energizes us and leaning in. If it feels good, and, people are asking, us for more, to just explore that, if it feels right to do that, but while at the same time, it is that balance. I call it the giving spectrum, that balance of giving to ourselves and giving to other people, constantly just looking and seeing, right, how might this fit? But I like to adopt a curious approach to life, curiosity and adventurer.
Oh,
my two favourite words.
Fan of curiosity and adventure, both of those.
Yeah. They're the two favourites, so, yeah.
And it's interesting because even when we're stuck at home, we can still have adventures, can't we?
Totally. Yeah, I did an intuitive art course 3-4 weeks ago. That was an adventure.
Really?
Yeah, it's fabulous. Online with, it was great. But we've been going off. My reason for working is I'd really like to get a camper van. Love the camper van. I see myself, travelling all over the place with a wee camper van. But
you're just my twin, aren't you? You're just my Scottish twin. I mean, what is going on? We are having fantasy conversations about camper vans in my house too.
Well, there's a massive... I mean,
it's a midlife thing. It really is a midlife woman thing, I think.
I think it's a midlife woman thing.
Out.
Yeah. But with COVID as well, I mean, we've been up at there's a place locally that does local conversions. There's a 1-year wait because of COVID. And, we were meant to...
Do it yourself. You're going to have to do a course. There's a very good YouTube channel on how to convert your own camper van.
Yeah, we've watched them, but my husband would be very good at that piece, but he's too busy with his work. So we've looked at it and gone, no, there's got to be easier ways of doing it. Because then I was like, well, I could buy one, rent it out, because you can Airbnb them type thing. And, paid off in 2 years before we retire. Fab. And I was like, I don't want to be cleaning people's toilets every Saturday. There's got to be an easier way to earn the money to have the camper van. And along comes yoga. So we'll see where that goes. I don't know. It's all an adventure.
Oh my goodness. Maybe that's the next business opportunity, is to share camper vans. We'll have a network and we can share them around all these midlife women. How fun would that be?
Well, what I'm looking at, I found a place last week. One of my adventures last week was going off and doing alpaca trekking with my niece. It was her birthday. So we went alpaca training. Very near me. Didn't know it was there.
Okay,
and they have this beautiful... we're allowed to within our own area with up to 6 people. But
we wouldn't find the alpacas.
Oh, you wouldn't find it. Well, you never know, Rachel. I had no idea there were alpacas down the road from me. I've been here for years. No idea. But it's massive big teepees and big fields. And I was like, could I do a retreat here? Could I have women with their camper vans coming up here. So
I'll come.
Yeah, that just sounds fab to me. So I'm exploring. It's on my list of things in my business plan to have the conversation with the person who runs the place. So we'll see. And it's got a private beach. I mean, it's right beautiful. The beaches here are phenomenal. So I was like, yay, this is sounding good.
Wow.
So I don't know.
Exciting. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So before we get off too far into our camper van dream, tell me about your give to profit model.
So this is for anybody who's in business. When I was going out to Rwanda and I needed to, cover all my own costs, I needed to raise money for the project as part of that. I was running a full-time training consultancy business at that point, and I didn't have any time to do fundraising. So what I did was, I started making these bracelets. If you're watching the YouTube video, I've got a little bracelet. I call them miracle beads. They're the chakra colours. And, I'd go along to a networking event, say the usual spiel, mention I was, raising money for Rwanda and I had these bracelets, and I'd raise £200-300 at almost every networking event I went to, and people would buy the bracelets. I was like, all right, this is an easy way of raising money. What then actually surprised me even more was that because people wore them, I was an anchor now for them, and they remembered me. So when they were looking for speakers, when they were looking for a coach, somebody to come and do the emotional well-being piece, they would call me. And so my business was growing on the back of the fundraising I was doing. And then for one of my other earlier trips, I can remember sitting at the computer thinking, oh gosh, I still need to raise another £1,000. How am I going to do this? The trip was only 6 weeks away. And I just put in my Facebook group, needing to raise £1,000, thinking of doing a 2-day event at my house on how to take your workshops online. Anybody interested? And within 2 hours, it was full. And I had a waiting list for another event. And I was like, okay. So I raised the money. But what was, again, even more surprising was that at that 2-day event, I had 10 people who had all paid, donated so that I had the money. And I was listening to them and observing, and all of them at the end were saying, well, listen, can we not get together regularly and help each other out so that we actually have the support of creating our online courses? And I said, well, okay, well, how about we do a mastermind once a month, £95 a month, any takers? And they all signed up there and then. And I was just like, wow. Okay, so now I've, for some people, an extra £1,000 a month might not be much. For me at the time, it was, But so what I was starting to realise was when you're strategic in the way you do your fundraising through your business will grow, which of course is beneficial for everybody. And that online course is still, actually was one of the things I pivoted into in April. When I saw everybody needing online courses, I went out and offered it again. And so actually that's been what's kept me going financially this year, was I continued to deliver something that was delivered as a fundraiser 10 years ago. So it's, if you're somebody who wants to raise funds through your business, but you're struggling for time or you don't think you have the money, bringing fundraising into your business can save you time, and it can actually generate you business, and you can have more impact. And nowadays, there's loads of research out on this, but consistently research will show over 90% of consumers want to do business with businesses who care, with businesses who have a story, businesses that are thinking about more than just money. And there are, my book talks about different ways, like sourcing social suppliers. In the same way we might choose buying from a social enterprise personally, we can do the same in business. But actually fundraising can be very powerful too. And one of the things, and one of the reasons I wrote my book, because so many people were asking me how to do it in a way that you could fundraise and grow your business. And through writing the book, at that point I had quite a large American audience. I'm American and Australian. And I discovered that there's legislation all around the world around fundraising through a business, which I had no idea about. I'd been doing it. And it applies in the UK too. And I almost didn't write the book, because I was like, how do I write a book that covers legislation in all these different countries? It's different. But there is now a chapter in the book around, if you're mentioning fundraising in your business, there is legislation you need to apply in most Western countries now. So there's principles you can adopt. So yeah. So that's where that all came from. All a bit of a surprise, but it's been such a special journey, because it's been amazing to see so many people take their businesses and turn them into, a positive force for good, and they feel more engaged with their business, which is really, really good.
And do you have any thoughts on how, if we don't have a business as individuals, how can we make a difference, or how can we carry on making a difference in this rather weird COVID world in which we find ourselves?
The first thing I would say is it's okay to think of you and yourself. So it's the balance between finding something that you really want, that will help you feel good, because we've all got to cope in this, challenging world too. So finding something that lights up your fire, finding something that fills a gap in your life is totally fine, because it's the balance of looking after yourself and others. And also be looking at what needs are there. And that might be local, there might be a local need. So even though I do things overseas, I do actually have need to also do things that are closer to home, in different ways, and start to explore, contact different voluntary organisations. If you want to give your time, then you can go contact the voluntary organisations. If you're somebody who doesn't have time but you have money, again, do your research around the charities that you might want to support. Speak to people. There are so many different causes. And the other thing is, it doesn't necessarily have to be a registered charity or a social enterprise. It could be a school club. It could be a community project. It could be something that's set up specifically for COVID. Go out with the intention to explore what that might be and set yourself a goal, and you will find it. But it's about prioritising that desire and taking the time to think for yourself around what it is you're looking for, because there's so many different ways to make a difference.
And what would you like women to know?
You matter. You matter. Each of us was born into this world with exactly the same rights to be loved and to love, to be happy, to live a good life, and to be part of a community with others. We are a social species. And the only thing that gets in the way sometimes of us really feeling that deep feeling of I matter, as in the people, you listening to this or watching this, not me as in the person, but but you're saying to yourself, I matter, and that feeling of I matter is that somewhere along the line you've heard messages that have caused you to doubt that. And you absolutely do. And no matter where you are right now, no matter what's going on in your life right now, it is possible for you to create the change, or some aspects of the change, if not all aspects of the change, that you want to see for yourself and that you want to see in the world. It's about committing to yourself to say, you know what, I do matter. I'm going to put myself first. And even if that is going to bed earlier at night, or feeding myself something different, or saying no to somebody and learning that starts you off on the journey. And then take that, see where that leads you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share it, and leave me a review wherever you're listening. It really helps me get the message out. You can find out more information about this episode in the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you'll find strategies, support, and resources to help make your midlife magnificent. Get clarity on how to make the most of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.